Hello, welcome to the interview. We'll be interviewing our dad. His name is Andor Nash. First question.
What are the political viewpoints of the general? How did the general public see the political government in Romania?
Okay, before we get into that, let me say a couple of words. We are originally Hungarian. I grew up in Romania. Romania is in Eastern Central Europe, and the political system was a socialist communist system. So, and I was 21 when the system changed. So your age plus 5 years, right? So I was in college essentially. So anyway, I don't want to spend more time on that, but I thought I'll just level the field there. And let's go back to the question now. Go ahead and say the question again.
How did the general public view politics as a general idea?
So it was a one-party system, essentially a dictatorship, because what these guys did, they came up with these fancy ideas, but then when it came to implementing them, they kind of turned them around. And so the general population's view of the system was quite negative, right? I mean, it got to the point where you couldn't buy food in the grocery stores, and like babies were dying and that kind of stuff. Older people couldn't have a decent retirement because the economy was doing better. Nevertheless, I don't view myself as a victim, right? I mean, this is very interesting. You guys probably don't have this kind of experience, but in these situations, you learn to cope and you try to figure out how to get ahead. So nevertheless, the short answer is the general population's view of the system and the political system was very, very negative. And just to add to that, and then I'll wrap up the question because we have a lot of questions, right? However, just like with any system, the ones who were close to the leadership and were close to the goods, so to speak, those guys viewed it very positively, right? Because, hey, it was, I actually picked up this saying here in the US, it was gravy train for them. They didn't have to work, and they had it very well, very good, right? So anyway, that's the answer.
How does your personal experiences in Romania differ from your experiences in the United States?
Well, it is a different world, culturally, language. However, there are a lot of things which are common, right? Which have to do with people in general, right? I mean, people do appreciate a decent handshake, an eye contact, straight talk, good hardworking people, and that is no different in any one of these other conditions where the either the economic or political system is different. So I guess that's the common. When it comes to some of these how should I say this, inconsistencies, nobody appreciates that, right? I mean, if you are told, hey, work hard and you'll have a decent life, and then you do that, and in 30 years down the road, you discover that that was a big lie, you're going to be pissed, right? At the minimum. So, anyway, I guess the answer I'm giving is actually both ways. It was very different in a sense, but it was very not different in another sense. But I'll point out one big difference, okay, as a bonus. Cars were much smaller.
In Romania?
And in general in Europe. So if you were to compare, and I'll give you an example, a Toyota Corolla here is considered a small car. Over there it's considered a family car. Are you with me? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a tangible difference.
That's a big difference.
Okay.
What was it like to join the military in Romania?
Okay, so I guess you guys figured that out. I had to do that because it was a draft system, and the draft pretty much applied to everybody. And because I got accepted to college, I ended up doing less time. So I only spent about 10 months in the Romanian army as opposed to 1.5 years for guys who didn't get into college. And of course the system was such that boys or young male adults had to enroll, and then ladies and young ladies they didn't have to do that, and they had kind of like training along the way, but they didn't have to go to boot camp or but it was an interesting experience. I was a corporal, and I did anti-aircraft training on 100mm guns, which are pretty big. The equipment was outdated. I don't think anybody wanted to really do it, on one hand. On the other hand, the alternative was to go to jail, so people kind of figured it's better in the army than in jail. So that was it in a nutshell. I had wonderful colleagues. I don't want to say friends, because then life kind of took us in so many directions that I wouldn't call them friends, although, like I said, I had wonderful colleagues. I learned a lot about people and situations and life in general in the army. And actually, your generation is, I don't want to say you are losing out, but having that kind of experience, I think, helps young men. I don't necessarily agree with force and wars and fights and just shooting everybody into the ground and that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you gotta understand, and these are gonna be harsh words, there is evil out in the world. You guys hopefully don't see it or don't experience it, but there is evil out in the world. And I'm of the opinion that in order to at least hold the line when evil tries to take over, is even if you don't like conflict, even if you don't like battles and war, you got to do what you got to do. You don't have a lot of chance. So I mean, you don't have a lot of choice. So I guess to summarize, it wasn't necessarily a positive experience, but we tried to make the best of it. And like I said, 10 months, roughly a year, is not too long. And actually, the interesting question, I'll surprise you guys. Give me a second. Just the other day, I think I dug up these pictures.
Another question?
Excellent picked.
And actually, you're not going to be able to record that, but this is how we looked like back then. You're going to see AK-47s. That was the gun of choice. That was the uniform there. That's the winter uniform, actually, with the hats. And I guess, I don't know. You probably saw movies where you saw that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's the answer there.
All right, this is a little unrelated, but how was the education system when you lived there?
The education system was very merit-based. So just to give you an idea, 8th grade to 9th grade, we had to take some exams. Then again, 10th grade to 11th grade, we had to take some exams. Then at the end of high school, we had to take some exams to get into college. And it was very, very competitive. And basically, it required you to study a lot and be ready and all that. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, it was free. So back in 1992, I came out of Romania with an engineering degree and zero debt and a lot of knowledge. Now, of course, the situation wasn't very good, but to my amazement, when I came here and I attended the George Washington University, when I went to admissions, I was like, well, these guys, they're going to be like, what and how and where, right? And I walk in, and the lady was there, and she opened up a big book, and she was like, oh, when did you graduate? 92. Okay, what was the name of the university, this and that? Oh, okay, so this is it. All the undergrad credits and the undergrad diploma was essentially acknowledged. So I got into essentially grad school, no questions asked, 4,000 miles away. And I graduated with straight A's. I must admit, the first semester, I was like, what and how? And I don't want to say I was lost, but it definitely, how should I say this? It took a while to get acquainted, right? I was somewhat lucky with language because 2 years prior to that, while I was at college, I managed to work in summer camps here in the United States. I was in Maine and New Hampshire, and that helped a lot with the language. So, and by the way, even though this is unrelated, if you guys want to pick up languages after you do the studying and the working your asses off kind of thing, I would encourage you to look for experiences where you can spend weeks and months in an environment where the language is spoken and you don't have a choice, you're forced to do that. Because I think a lot of people are very, very touchy-feely with regards to languages, and it helps you tremendously. Um,
I'm just a fly on the wall, but can I mention something here? Do you want to talk a little bit about what you had to study in high school?
oh, I'm kind of hoping there are questions
Oh,
there
okay, sorry.
like
I
that.
mean, if you want to talk about your high school and what you learned in it.
No, just go ahead. But I think
That's a
this
good
is a good
follow-up.
one,
That's a good
and
follow-up.
we'll
Yeah, that's
do
why-
like a follow-up.
That's why I wanted to
Yeah,
mention it.
yeah. But in a nutshell, I did math and physics in high school, and then I graduated computer science from college and information systems from in grad school.
I think it would be interesting to discuss what was required and when you had to make the decision to study certain courses.
Okay.
And what courses were required
Okay.
every year, because
Okay.
it's so different from here.
We'll take a note of that, and we'll do a round at the end if you guys are still kind of not falling asleep or something.
All right.
How did the pollution affect current life in Romania?
So, actually, it was pretty bad because what happened, these guys, well, you probably figured I don't like communists by now. And again, if any of you has kind of leftist or whatever political views, one thing I want to put out there that even if you're the, I don't know, the staunchest communist, I don't have a problem with you. So I just want to tell you that my view of the world is that you can have your conviction and you can have your conviction, and you, so don't take this as something like, oh, mine is the best and yours is like, you know what I'm saying, including family and so on. But you probably figured by now I didn't like these communist guys because they were lying. And what really happened, they first drove the economy into the ditch, and then they borrowed a bunch of money, and then they essentially burned through that money, and then they drove the economy into like a ditch plus plus. And as a side effect of that was that even though in the 20th century we made so much progress for these technologies to clean up, right? I mean, even today you take coal, right? It's a fairly dirty fuel, but you can have filters and ventilation. And again, I'm not a chemical engineer or any of that, but given the right regulation and applying the right technologies, it became quite feasible to clean these things up, right? But of course, what happens is when you don't have money, you tend not to maintain things, right? I mean, it's the typical, if you don't have a lot of money, if you have an old car, it's gonna be not well maintained. So that's what happened. Just to give you a couple of bad examples, there were places where, let's say, they had some big factory, and you would like go out, and instead of seeing green, you would see black, because they wouldn't filter all the smoke out, and it would like go up and then come down, that kind of stuff. Or and you probably heard about this, even though the Chernobyl thing didn't happen in Romania, that is again an example of stupidity and lack of, I don't even know what to say. Nevertheless, I was still back in Eastern Europe when that happened. It happened in a neighboring Ukraine, but the way how luck works is after after the reactors kind of blew up, the wind kind of blew all that shit toward Romania. So even though we weren't part of the Ukrainian disaster, we got quite a bit of it. So anyway, I must say that it was the record was quite bad. And it's a shame, because one could argue that back 200 years ago, well, they didn't know a lot of stuff, right? I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Just 50 years ago, they thought that asbestos is the best thing you can have in this world, right? And today, if you find asbestos in a building, you're going to have like special protection and all that stuff to take it out, right? So what I'm saying is that maybe 200 years ago or 100 years ago, not taking care of the environment that much was more like ignorance or mankind or not knowing enough, right? Mm-hmm. However, as time went by, we learned a lot about it, and of course, that's the power of knowledge, that if you know, you do have as a human the moral obligation not to screw it up, or at least not to screw it up too much. At least that's what I think. I don't mean to sound too idealistic though.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like a follow-up to this, have there been any efforts to reduce this pollution, or is it getting any better? Or
I think so. Talk about change. Change came swiftly, and you guys probably learned about it or studied. The Soviet Union collapsed in roughly 1989, and all these what they are called satellite states collapsed. Pretty much along those lines. In Romania, the change was bloody. In my town, they shot at least 50 people who were protesting against it. I actually have some really bad stories about it. And of course, this dictator, his name was Ceausescu, they kind of executed him too. He deserved it, actually. You look at these pictures, you can actually find all this stuff on well, not the bad part of it, but at the end of the day, army guys like this, they just walk him up to a wall and not, like I said, I'm not a very violent person, but if I go back to those times, and if I were in that position to, hey, okay, they are lined up, pull the trigger, I'm telling you right now, I would have pulled the trigger, no questions asked, and probably I would have asked for another couple of rounds of munitions too, just to make sure. Now, I don't mean to be too cavalier about it, right? Because we are talking about essentially killing human beings, but I'm just telling you, that was pretty much okay. So back to the question though, which is about change, yeah. Right? So change came swiftly in roughly end of 80s, beginning of 90s. And just to kind of date it for you guys, Ronald Reagan was president in the United States, right? And you probably hear a lot about the fall of the Berlin Wall and blah, 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 blah. And looking back at the roughly past 30 years, change brought much better times. And that is essentially the answer. So there were political and economic waves and ups and downs along the way, but change happened for the good. And with that came good stuff, and that kind of connects back to the previous questions where, like, pollution today is nowhere what it used to be back 30 years ago. People have more money, and a lot of them have learned not to use it in bad ways, right? Because actually that's one of the dangers of money, that you have it and then you kind of do bad things. And again, I don't want to go into that, but a lot of them figured out to use this relative prosperity for good and positive things. And when I say good and positive things, is think about whatever, better cars, better public transportation, better schools, better future for a younger generation, less pollution in the air, people, I don't want to say being more honest, but like economically, right? I mean, in order for an economy to work, companies have to trust each other, right? I mean, you go and buy something on eBay, you pay $5, you essentially trust the other guy to take your $5 and ship you the, I don't know, the phone cover, right? And even though you guys don't realize that, that assumes a certain trust relationship. So that would be an example of, I see that as an improvement where you can do commerce and it works, right?
Yeah.
So,
what brought you to the United States, or why leave Romania to come to the United States?
so like I said earlier, I was extremely lucky because back in 1989, after the system changed, I once walked up to a poster and there was a piece of paper. I must say it was a pretty crappy piece of paper, and it said, Camp America, work in the US in summer camps. And me being me, I was like, maybe that's something for me, right? And I was a little bit older than you guys. I believe I was in second or third year in college, so that puts me, well, let me make sure that I'm not lying here. I think it was 1990. It was almost like a time travel, because so these Camp America guys, as you probably figured, they were, well, actually these guys were a British agency, but working on a US program, essentially, who matched college kids with summer camps. And the way it worked, you pretty much had to put in like 2 months, and then you had a month for travel, and they pretty much provided you with everything, including health insurance. They didn't provide you with a lot of cash, but you know, you typically stayed there, so you had room and board and some stipend kind of thing, and it was actually a lot of fun. That was my first experience back in 1990 with the U.S. And the first summer I was in Maine. Well, there are a couple of funny things which I'm going to tell you, right? Because I mean, in addition to this, you have to come away with some fun also, right? So anyway, I fly into London, and then over there I meet the representative who was kind of briefing everybody, and she's telling me, and the other guys also, that hey, you're gonna board an airplane and you're gonna go to New York, and I'm like, what's wrong with you, right? I mean, what do you mean New York? Well, you can kind of figure that I couldn't tell apart Newark from New York, right? And but then I was like, okay, whatever, right? And of course I arrive in essentially New York, and I get on a bus, and there is a bus driver there, and he's speaking this New York, New Jersey, whatever accent he had, and I was like, I'm in deep trouble because I don't understand one freaking word here. Now, of course, if you ever went up there and you bumped into one of these bus drivers who really talks fast, You know what I'm talking about, right? Well, so actually that was the first experience, but then things started to get into normal because the program was very well organized, and we essentially worked with kids and young adults and did how should I say this, work which benefited society, so to speak. So it was a very positive work, right? And that was my first experience. And then back in '93, I put in another summer like that. And then to kind of complete the question, I met your mother in Budapest. So and then I got a scholarship here at the George Washington University, starting in that was fall 1993, and that was a very good deal also, because they paid, I think, 6 credits per semester, and I had to put in 20 hours, but it was a wonderful experience because it was a university environment, and so essentially the way how I look at it is I landed the job almost out of the blue. Not that I wasn't qualified, or not that I wasn't hardworking, but it was my first real experience about you kind of putting together the studying building blocks and the paperwork and the diploma, and having that feeling that it is working. You know what I'm saying? So along the way there were ups and downs, but that's always part of it, right? As a matter of fact, since we are at this, if everything is going like that for you, okay, be very careful about that, because it gives you this feeling that it's always going to be like that, and actually there's nothing wrong with it as long as you are aware of that, because in the long run life will have its ups and downs, you know what I'm saying? And of course, meeting those ups and downs early, it prepares you to cope with that, right? As opposed to if everything goes very, very well and then something hits you, I don't mean a car or anything, then some people take a bigger blow. They still cope, but they take a bigger blow. So that's it in a nutshell.
So there's a little follow-up to that. Was it hard for you to adapt to the U.S. once you moved there?
Well, yes and no. I mean, for example, in the summer camp, because my English wasn't very well, and I mean, you can tell, right? I mean, by the way, every language I speak 3 languages. I have an accent. So anyway, for example, in Maine, after 2 weeks, this guy, the camp director, he was like, well, you know, I'd like to do this job, but I'm not sure how you would get along with these French-Canadian guys who were working at the camp, right? Doing basically maintenance work and just keeping up with having the operation run smoothly, right? I mean, you can figure the grass had to be cut, and the trucks had to be driven, hauling out the trash and that kind of stuff. And of course, they asked me whether I'm ready to do that after 2 weeks, and I was like, well, I've never met a French-Canadian guy in my life, but I guess I can do it. And it actually worked out perfectly, because if you have that attitude of I want to earn what I want, then people actually don't have a problem giving it to you. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the simple it might sound. But then I have some funny stories also, right? So, for example, the units of measurements are different back in Europe. It's a metric system, and over here, and of course, there was no internet and no smartphone, and I couldn't look it up on Google. And at one point, I had to fill up the tires in the small truck. I still remember it was one of these older GMC trucks, right? And me being me, I drive the truck to the gas station, and I fill it up with air. And I'm driving back to the camp, and I'm like, this is so stiff, right? Well, it turns out I probably put 3 times as much pressure into them as normal. And even I was pretty good with math, and I was aware of the conversions and everything. But so you're gonna have those things, right? There are some other funny ones too, but yeah, you have to adapt. There's no question about that. I don't think I didn't have bad experiences, but even you guys, again, we don't have to go into details, but I'm telling you, you guys, if you grew up on the East Coast and you go to the West Coast, you'll have a little bit of, how should I say this, a little bit of adaptation to do, mostly for the good, I think. So that's it.
A couple more questions.
So you mentioned how when Romania was under communist control, they basically destroyed the economy. How did it recover and become better?
Actually, this is a very good question. So, Romania was unique in such a way that by the end of the 1980s, this guy Ceausescu, the dictator, he managed to pay back most of the loans he took out. Now, of course, this was the hard work of the people. So in 1990, Romania didn't have debt, and of course the reason I'm saying this is even the U.S. is in, well, you guys are a young generation, and I don't want to ruin your day, but the U.S. is in, how should I say this, in a lot of debt, and that's not good. And it's especially not good for your generation, but anyway, I don't want to get into that. So anyway, it was in a lot of debt, and then they paid it back. But after they paid it back, the problem was that everything was in ruins. So basically, if they had to manufacture a nail, they didn't know how to do that. I'm exaggerating, but you do understand that there is good debt and bad debt, right? And you could have a company and it's in debt, but if it's owning a technology or a piece of a market, then the two are in balance, because that market share and that capability of producing something can finance the debt and make money, right? I mean, you guys understand that. So they were in deep trouble. The most visible of what happened was it took 20 years to get out of that situation. And the short answer is this saying, which I'm sure you guys heard, is when you're in a hole, the first thing you have to do is you gotta stop digging. So that was the first step. And then, unfortunately, when you are a hole, you're just gonna work your ass up to dig yourself out of that hole. There is no magic, right? And they did. Now, in this process, a lot of people ended up doing quite badly. To give you examples is old people who worked their whole life ended up living on $50 a month, which is a problem. Let me tell you that. Or inflation was so high for 20 years that at the end of the 20 years, they had to cut off, I believe, between 3 and 6 zeros, which is really bad, right? Because have you ever heard what inflation is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like this phone costing $10,000, right?
Yeah.
It's not good, and your salary not keeping up with that, right? So they got out of that situation by slowly working very, very, very hard. And they actually got lucky, or I don't know, we got lucky because along the way they got help. So, but essentially they got out of it. I don't want to say mostly by now, because still when you look at these Eastern European countries, you are going to see very, very high poverty levels. So I guess they're still working themselves out, but the situation has improved quite a bit.
Okay.
So much time.
Yeah. We're at 42 minutes, so I think that's enough for now. The minimum is 20, so I think
Thanks.
we went past pretty well.